iDS Talks is a podcast dedicated to helping corporations and law firms find new and effective ways to leverage data, giving them a decisive advantage both in and out of the courtroom.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of iDS Talks, where we seek truth through data. I am Bobby Williams, the director at iDS. This is my colleague, Drew O'Shaughnessy, a consultant here at iDS, and we are two very, very diligent members of the iDS team. I'm glad to be doing this with you, Drew. We've talked a lot about doing this particular episode, and looking forward to this being the first of a lot of things that we do together on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to be discussing an eDiscovery response to the Epstein files. But before we begin, Drew and I want to be very, very clear. Regardless of your politics, this is a very serious matter with real impacts for the parties involved and for all of us watching this as it unfolds. So nothing we say, examine, nothing that we hypothesize, none of that should diminish the very real experiences of the victims in this matter. We do data, and data is what we're going to be discussing. So let's not take anything away from the experiences of the people involved in this matter. It has gravity. It is very serious. We recognize that. And that is one of the reasons why we are even doing this, because how data is handled is important in all matters, and especially matters with the level of depth and severity that we see in this case. So with that little disclaimer, Drew, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be looking at today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to this too, Bobby. You and I have sent weeks, it feels like, of messages about this topic in particular, and we are so excited about it. We're gonna make it a two-parter. So this is part one, and in part one, we're going to discuss the forensic examination and evidence validation of the Epstein files. In our next episode, part two, we're going to get some of our colleagues in here from our discovery services lines, and we're going to discuss a litigation response to the eDiscovery files. We're going to talk about preparing for trial, what to do with these documents once we confirm that they're valid. So let's set the scene, Bobby, shall we?
Yeah, let's go.
This is a scenario that, it's a hypothetical scenario. It's a real data set, and a scene that we see real time often. So hypothetically, you're days or weeks out from a trial. There have already been a few small productions in the litigation, and then bam, 3 million documents dropped on you from an opposing party. And that's basically what happened here. It's, not a necessarily litigation, but that's happening here with the Epstein files, right? There were a few small tranches of data that were released by the DOJ. And then earlier this year in January, boom, 3 million documents, ton of them with redactions coming from a bunch of different sources, some of which are duplicates of previous productions, some of which are similar but not exact duplicates. And there's a lot of people that are, like you said, are feeling the impacts of this and want to know what's real, what's not. What do we do with this data? How do we approach it? And that's something that in the eDiscovery world, in litigation, we do this all the time. So we felt it was important for us to give our perspective on this. Like Bobby said, there's a ton of gravity here. Bobby, anything else you want to add about the setting the scene before we get into what these documents actually are?
Yeah, I mean, as you were just talking, Drew, the first thing I think about is it's very important in every matter how you handle data at the beginning. You don't know what's going to reach the level of litigation many times in our work. Like there's just often disputes, but sometimes there's just an internal investigation. Sometimes there's an arbitration situation, but you don't know if it's going to reach the level of litigation. But you need to treat every situation like it is going to reach the level of litigation, because that is how you help ensure you put the proper controls in place so that once you get to litigation on that matter or other matters, you're ready. You have the documentation, you followed the steps, you have vetted and verified. And yeah, that's the thing I think about
Yeah.
primarily is like just handling data as if it's going to litigation,
Yeah.
even if you don't know definitively that it is.
A lot easier to do it right from the beginning, right? Than have to figure it out later.
Look, you're always going to be answering questions, right? The
Yeah.
the question is, what questions do you want to be answering?
Yeah.
You know, questions about the facts or questions about how you handle the data,
Right.
right?
Right. Um, well, let's dive into these documents then. So I've pulled here from the DOJ themselves. When they released the most recent production of documents, they gave a disclaimer on the production format. So it's a couple sentences. I'm gonna read it here just to level set so we're on the same page. But it says production format. In general, documents have been produced in the format that they were collected and loaded into the document management system. For example, if a document obtained from a third party during a criminal investigation originally had redactions in it, the produced version of that document contains those redactions. Additionally, electronic files, example emails, were provided or obtained in various formats. They were loaded into the document management system for review. These various formats have caused certain emails to display differently, appear cut off, or display with symbols. So that's something we see all the time, Bobby, right? You get productions from third parties, you get productions from the opposing party, you may get FOIA requests, government subpoenas, uh, data coming in from all different directions that that may be similar, may be produced in prior litigation, may have some redactions, but it's all got to get streamed into one line of review. But before we do that, we've got to make sure that that there's some integrity, right? Are these forensically sound?
Mhm.
And especially with documents like this, where that's highly sensitive material.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah,
It's got a big public interest. It's important documents.
yeah.
And so that kind of sets the scene of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, yeah. You may people listening, I'm sure may definitely people in the litigation world may be familiar with the term best evidence. And that's what I think about in a situation like this. When you're getting files, you're getting data from tons of different sources, tons of different data types, and the let's say the condition of the data you're getting is different, depending on where you got it from. You need to be asking some questions. You need to be
Yeah.
arming yourself with questions. One of those questions is, did I get best evidence? Right? If somebody sent me emails and they felt like they needed to redact before they sent me those emails, and so they gave me PDFs that are redacted, I already know that the optimal format for an email is not a PDF. The optimal format is like native version
Yeah.
of an email, right? So, did they give me best evidence? You know, and look, I'm just asking the question from a technological perspective. The lawyers are going to have a perspective on, whether or not it was appropriate for somebody to redact something before they produced it to the opposing party, or, the court will make a decision about whether or not something should be produced unredacted, right? I'm simply making a technological statement that if I'm going to receive something, the way to give me the most possible information about that file is as close as possible to its original format.
Yeah.
And so that's a question you need to be asking.
So, Bobby, you talk about the original format, um, and this is something that you're a director in forensics. You deal with this stuff all the time. Maybe for the listener that doesn't understand, whether they're new to this world, new to litigation, or someone like me that deals with data once it comes in already, right? Like once it's been processed, once we've got all of it. Um, could you give just a 30-second elevator pitch on, how we get this data, where it comes from, and how we keep track of its history, its life cycle?
Yeah. So we track data in many different ways at IDS, right? And what I'm not going to do is say like there's one definitive set way you're supposed to do this, right? Different service providers have different workflows. The most important thing is that the documentation is comprehensive, that is thorough, and that however it is tracked, you be able to answer questions about how data was collected, how it was organized, how it was handled once you got involved with it to help provide the service, to help become a steward of that data, right? But we do all kinds of things like in particular, if we're receiving data from multiple parties, we might put together a matrix, and that matrix will not just say who the custodians were, but it would say the organizations or institutions that data came from, right? It'll have dates of receipt. We'll have identifiers to help determine whether or not we collected it directly ourselves versus it's data that was provided to us. So we didn't actually engage with the native system ourselves. That's an important detail,
Yeah.
right? There are certain things I can say if I collected it myself. There's certain things I may not be able to say if someone else collected it and provided me with the data. So it's just important to note all of those things. But that's
Yeah.
why I say, yeah, you might want to put a matrix together. We have document trackers, we have evidence trackers where we note, like, did this come from a mobile device? Did it come from a laptop? Did it come from a cloud storage location? Right. And you would think these things would be simple, right? But you would never want to be in a deposition or get on a stand and not be able to answer these very simple questions about, did this document come from a mobile device or did this document come from a laptop? Did it come from Dropbox or did it come from Google Drive? You said cloud. Was that cloud OneDrive or was that cloud box, right? All of those details should be captured in your documentation so that you can answer questions about those cleanly and unambiguously.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I think, um, I think it's very good that you noted that just because that's the way we do it doesn't mean that that's the way everyone does it. Everyone has their own workflow. Um, but we have found the way that works best for us. And I think IDS generally, as you said at the beginning, we prepare like this is going for litigation. We prepare like we're gonna have to sit on the stand.
Yeah,
Um, and there's a difference between tracking information and having information available in case we have to testify to it.
exactly. Yeah. That's the IDS way.
Right. That's right. That's right. Okay, so that's generally the chain of custody, right? That's how we track where things are coming from. Let's go back to the idea or the IDS, the eDiscovery Epstein files. Let's go back to the Epstein files. Um, so these files have come in from all different places,
Mhm.
right? What's the first question you're advising our client to ask about this data, about how this data got there? What are some of the first things that come to mind that you would want to know from the producing party about where these documents came from?
So the first question I'm asking is not necessarily a validation or verification question. The first questions I'm asking are logistical questions, right? And the answers to those logistical questions are going to determine whether or not I see any red flags about whether or not I should trust the data. But it's really going to be questions that focus on who had it, when was it collected, how was it collected, and how is it handled during the process of collection, right? Um, and so those are like really broad, high level questions, which are chain of custody questions, right?
Yeah.
But that's gonna let me know like who is the custodian. Also, I may want to know like if people know off the top of their head if there's a date range involved, like how far back does this data go? Um, I also want to know if you provided the data to us, did you collect it yourself or did you get a third party? And if that third party collected, did they generate documentation? If they have documentation, they could share with us so that we could verify. Because all I'm trying to do is just tell a really clean story about how the data was handled. And that's
Yeah.
simple. That's like a super simple. Um, you don't want how the data was handled to become the story,
Yeah.
right? So I'm asking those questions at the beginning so I can just understand how the data was handled. And if there are some of those questions can't be answered, then I might have some questions about whether or not I can actually trust the data I've been given, which is a whole another thing.
Right. Well, let's start to head that direction. Let's start to talk about authentication of evidence and trusting the data that we have. Um, yeah, so I think from my perspective, there's certain things that we look for once the data is processed, once it's in, and we're starting an investigation. Some of those things are hash values. Some of those things would be complete metadata once it's loaded in. But even prior to that, is there anything that you're looking for? Let's say that some of these documents were previously redacted, and so we're not getting a full original version of them. What are some things that you would look for to help you authenticate the evidence early on?
Well, before I even jump into that, if I didn't get the original version, I'd like to know why.
Yeah, right.
Because technologically, that's going to have an impact on my assessment of whether or not what I did get was trustworthy and whether or not it's best evidence, right? But so I want to know why. But there's lots of things you can look at in a document if it's not even original evidence with the original metadata that could still be informative. All data gives you information, whether it's authentic evidence or it's falsified evidence. It's all just information. It's all data points, right? There's a story in it,
Yeah.
regardless of whether it's the original or whether it's a derivative, right? But if I don't have the original metadata, there's still stuff that I could look at. The file that I do get, it is going to have metadata in it, right? That metadata is going to have anywhere from created dates and modified dates to um, print dates to it may have it may identify authors, it may identify the last author, it
Yeah.
may identify the tool. If it's a PDF, it may identify the tool that was used to create the PDF. It may even identify the version of the tool that was used to create the PDF. Files have headers, so even if you give me a file and it's not the original file, but it has a header and it has an extension that's different from what the header says it's supposed to be, that gives me information about the file, right? And the way files are encoded is another thing that I don't know if people think about. Like when you think about like something as simple as a text file, and somebody represents that a text file was created, back in 2008 or
Right.
something. And you look at that text file and you look at how it's encoded, and you would expect it maybe to be like ASCII or something like that from, not to get too nerdy, but
No.
you expect it to be something like ASCII or something like that because it was made in a 2008 version of Windows.
Yeah.
But you look at the encoded and it's like by default UTF-8, which is more of like a Windows 10, Windows 11 encoding. Well, you claim that this document was created back in 2008, but the encoding is giving me an indicator that that document was created much more recently, right?
Oh, that's good.
Not definitive that it's a fake
Right.
document, but it is in definitive that there's a contradiction to the story that I
Right.
don't have all the information that I'm supposed to have, right?
That's good. So for things like that, Bobby, for for encoding for some of these metadata fields that you talked about that aren't the typical things we see day to day in eDiscovery, do you need an original native file for those, or can you get some of that or request some of that of the opposing party down the line if that gets called into question?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I'm always doing from the technological side is, and like I said, the legal teams have to argue about this,
Yeah.
right? What I am always doing is just telling the legal teams, this is what I can learn from what I have.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more, I need this. And then it's
That's
up to the
good.
legal team to push to try to get that. And it may be within legal boundaries for them to get it. It may not be within legal boundaries for them to get it, but they have to argue and fight that out. And maybe a judge has to decide, or maybe decides just maybe the parties agree. And they just exchange what needs to be exchanged. But from a scientific perspective, my stance is I'm trying to figure out what we're trying to learn from this data. What's the story that the data is telling? And based on what you give me, I can learn certain things. But if you want to learn other things, I may not be able to get that part of the story from the data that we have. And there may be other versions, earlier versions, native versions that will give us more information. And the only way to know is to get it so that you can analyze it.
That's so good. So on the note of some of the non-original, non-native versions, because I think the Epstein files had a lot of those, a lot of documents that were redacted, a lot of documents that came from prior litigation that got
Yep.
produced again.
Yep.
What are some immediate we need to look into this red flags, right? Like what is the first level of first line of defense where, if this isn't here or if this is here, we need to further question this document. Anything that you're thinking of. You talked about, mismatching dates with the encoding. I know we've got a couple of projects that iDS has been engaged on in the past where simple things like emoji and font type don't match the version of the phone that the purported text message came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that are immediate on the face of the document, red flags. Anything that comes to mind that, like, if you see this, that's a red flag immediately.
So before I even get that far, the first questions I'm asking are like really high level when I look at the document. First, I'm asking story questions. Human beings are creatures of we like stories, right? That's how I think, process information most easily. That's how information stays stickiest with us, right? So usually there's a narrative as to how these files, this data, this evidence, these documents, there's a story about how they came into existence, right? And why we have them. The first thing I'm asking is, how complicated is that story? Is it a really simple story or is it a really complicated story, right?
That's good.
The more complicated that story is, I'm like, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
We may need to dig into this. The second question I'm asking is what we were talking about before. Are these derivative documents or are they original documents? So the answer with a lot of what's in the Epstein files is a lot of it is derivative. All of it's not derivative, but a lot of it is derivative. So if it's derivative, if it's like a secondary piece of evidence or even third or fourth generation piece of evidence, then initially that's a red flag for me. It's a red flag that can be satisfied if the documentation clarifies why we have this version of it. And even if it's like the old version still exists, but for some legal reason, I can't have access to it, right? That could even satisfy it. I can say, okay, it exists. Someone who is capable and knowledgeable in digital forensics is able to verify and certify that it's legitimate. And I can say, well, I can't speak to that because I can't look at it. But if someone else is verifying that it exists, let's put a pin in it. And then another thing that I look for, like if I see one document that's like it's a panacea. It's like this resolves the whole case with this one document.
Yep.
I'm like, and it's magical and it like appeared out of nowhere. Okay. These are like the
Sometimes
those are the high level red flags. But then once you have those red flags, with your questions that, any legal professional can ask those questions, right? They're going to ask those questions. They don't like the answers to those questions. Then they're going to come to folks like us and say, okay, can you take a look at the files to help us determine whether or not they're authentic? And then I'm looking at stuff like, what does the metadata tell us about the document?
Yeah.
Is there anything weird with how the visual elements on the document are aligned on the page, right? We know how an Outlook email is supposed to look when you print it, right? So if there's weird stuff with the name at the top or how the email addresses are aligned or, how the subject is aligned with the email addresses, if there's weird stuff with how the thread alignment looks down in the body of the email, these are like indicators that something fishy could be going on with this file. Also, same thing with text messages, where we've done a lot of good work on falsified text messages specifically.
Yeah.
Where There can be different fonts. You mentioned the emojis, the way bubbles are aligned on the page. If you want to look at, if the listeners want to take a look at Rosbach v. Montefiore, that's a really good example of some of the in-depth fake evidence analysis we've done. And we want to be clear, when we're talking about the Epstein files, we're not saying anything is fake. We're saying that procedurally, when you have a lot of documents, these are just questions that we all need to be asking.
Right.
You may not be involved in the Epstein case, and thank goodness if you are not. But you may have gotten a large, highly redundant document production that you need to get your hands and your mind wrapped around. So you need to be asking these questions to make sure you understand that stuff. And the data might be fine. It may not be any falsified. It may all be authentic. You may be able to verify it, but you got to be asking the questions.
Yeah. And I think, it's important to note that you kind of alluded to it there, but this evidence authentication, it comes from two different directions, right? Like there is evidence that you may want, that is such an important piece of evidence to your case that you want 100% certainty it is valid evidence and there is no way it could be thrown out, right? That's an important way to authenticate evidence. Make sure that it's real if it's very important. But on the other side of it, if it smells a little fishy, if there's something that, like Bobby said, solves every issue in the case in a single document, and there are some immediate red flags, there's the evidence authentication from that perspective as well, right? Is it real because it is perfect, or is it not real and it is not perfect?
Right.
So I think evidence authentication comes from two directions.
Yeah. If you get if somebody produces an email, if somebody has a narrative, this person said I didn't have to pay for this, right? That's their narrative. And they're dealing with a person who has never said that to anybody in email. And they magically produce an email that says, hey, by the way, I usually pad my invoices so you don't have to pay this. Right? So I'm like, huh. That's abnormal.
Yeah.
for somebody to say I'm gonna do fraudulent things in email, but but I also understand that there are situations where people will do that. There's a certain level of comfort. There's this phenomenon, Drew. I don't know if you've ever heard of this phenomenon in reality television, where they turn on the cameras and the people in these reality TV shows, they're really hyper aware of the cameras initially, but eventually the cameras, they kind of recede into the background, and then they start to conduct themselves like the cameras are not present. Right? They kind of get used to, they adapt, kind of desensitized to the presence of the cameras. And I think that can happen in digital communications. It can happen in text messages and in emails and phone calls where, people they reach a certain level of comfort and they forget that they're creating records of their communications. So on one hand, it may be abnormal for someone to say, hey, I'm committing this fraud, and here's the email saying I'm committing this fraud.
Yeah.
In other circumstances, it could actually be quite normal for that to happen. If someone's if they're talking to somebody that they completely trust, and, some people think they're above the law and they think that they would never suffer any consequence for that because they're untouchable. So that's why you can't take a perspective on it that it definitely is fake or it definitely isn't fake. You got to look at the red flag and say, okay, I have questions and we need to go through the necessary steps to verify this.
Yeah. I love what you said earlier. Humans love stories.
Yeah.
We love a narrative. We attach to narratives. I think it's a lot of the way humans bond with each other.
Yeah.
Right. And data tells a story of its own.
Yeah.
And one of the things we love to do is to pull that story out of the data.
Yeah.
All right.
Our job. It's the iDS way, if I haven't said that enough.
Got one closing thought for you, Bobby. And then let's preview our next episode.
Yeah.
So you talked about different formats, right? We know the format an Outlook email is supposed to look like, right? But let's talk about potentially the same document, two fully authentic documents collected from two different sources, and how they might look different, but they're still authentic, right? Like, let's say one's collected from Gmail using one collection tool, and one is collected from Outlook using a totally different collection tool. How might those look different even though they're authentic?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. You know, you might have a future as a technologist asking questions like that, Drew. Um, so we talk a lot about hashing, like generating hash values, right? But what you are highlighting is a really good example of how two things could in fact be the same and have different hash values, right? So there might not be you might not be able to rely on a hash to tell you that they're exactly the same. But we know that Yahoo, AOL servers, they might handle messages slightly different than Google's servers, than Office 365's servers. It also may be different if you are having your messages only stored in the cloud versus having your messages be managed by a local client installed on a workstation, right? So you could have a message that was collected from the same account, but one was stored in a PST on a laptop and the other was collected from a cloud extraction, and the messages are the same message, but they might have slightly different properties. Emails have headers in them, right?
Mm.
And those headers in the email may be slightly different inside the email, uh, depending on whether it was in the cloud or if it was handled by a local mail client like Outlook, right? So these are things. Also, take it a step further. Um, if somebody authentically generates a PDF file from an email, right? And so you're looking at the MSG file, you're looking at the PDF file of that email, they're going to be different versions of the same email. They
Yeah.
absolutely will not hash the same. The create dates and metadata values are going to be completely different, but that PDF file was authentically and verifiably produced from that source email, that native email. They're the same document,
Yeah.
right? So, but there's metadata differences. There's visual differences. That's just why you have to ask the questions.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I say to that. That's a really, really, really comprehensive question.
Yeah. So I think that takes us to a good segue though into our next episode, right? So you've got multiple versions, whether it's from different productions, whether it's from different sources. How do you get through them efficiently? How would how would we advise our litigation ready client to get through such a large population of data
Yeah.
efficiently and in a sound defensible way? So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. We're going to preview a little AI. How are we going to use AI to get through these? We're going to talk about deduplication, safely storing information like that. I mean, we talked about at the beginning, Bobby. This is sensitive information. It's high profile information. How do you securely store this?
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got some really, really good conversations with some colleagues coming up our next episode.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm excited because we'll probably talk a little bit more about unstructured data analytics.
That's right.
So we'll get to hear a little bit more from Drew in his area of expertise.
Yeah. My bread and butter.
Yes, yes. Cool. Well, look, Drew, this was awesome.
Yeah.
I think this was a really great opening to the conversation. And again, man, I think you and I are gonna have some really, really great chats going forward
Yeah.
about this stuff. Thanks for coming up with the idea. Thanks for agreeing with me to treat this subject with the sensitivity
Yeah.
that I think is warranted and required.
Yeah, absolutely. Ton of gravity in this issue and all issues like this, right? This is a very high profile one because of the individuals involved, but this isn't the only issue in litigation, the only lawsuit out there that has sensitive material, high profile individuals, or victims' rights issues at play, and all of them need to be treated with that level of sensitivity.
Very true words. Thank you for that, Drew. And look, if you all have found what we've covered today helpful, insightful, informative, tell your colleagues to check us out and listen to the IDS Talks podcast. Share it. Send the link to someone. And as always, we've been really happy to share this information with you and to talk about important topics. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening.